Hello. It might be very difficult for me to make this video. I've been putting it off actually for a very long time, so we're gonna see how it goes. I have been not in a good mental place, I'll just say that. School started back up and I'm actually feeling super productive and like everything's on track with my thesis, but in my emotional and spiritual life it's been a lot more of a struggle. I just kind of want to like be honest with you guys and level with you guys because I feel like honesty is the best policy when it comes to these kind of things. I knew that this was the next video that I was gonna make because it's something that I think about a lot, because my spirituality and my belief in God tends to waver a lot. But at the same time, I had this really big resistance to get started, and I think it is kind of because I'm in this place right now. So I put it off, and that's why you didn't get a video last week, and I'm gonna see how this all goes. I want to address two questions that are pretty common for people that are getting into witchcraft, and that is basically, what if magic isn't real? And usually by extension of that, like, what if God / other spirits in the universe aren't real? Does that mean that being a witch, calling myself a witch, and doing all of these magical things that we do, are those still valid if there's nothing beyond the material life? Part of the reason I'm having difficulty, and I also want to do this now, is because the reason that I got into witchcraft was because I was in a place in my life where I had lost all faith in absolutely everything. It was at my lowest point that kind of lifted up this, I call it like a survival instinct that kind of kicked in me and made me continue to ritualize and want to do things. It was the only thing that I really had left at this point in my life. From a conceptual standpoint, that wasn't true. I had plenty of friends and people that still supported me, but I had gone through a massive transition in terms of my own emotional life, and it was the lowest that I had ever felt, and still probably have felt, even though it's been pretty hard in the coming weeks. It's not been as bad as I was at this point, because now I feel like I have a support structure and system and understand who I am as a person and what I need to do to get help. When I got back into the swing of things, after I got hit in the head and I was angry at God and I was like, okay, choosing not to believe anything, it actually made me feel really good again, and it became really easy to start believing in God and magic again, because I was seeing all of these good and wonderful things and all these patterns working in my life. But I found that it doesn't always stay that way, and I think that's a good and natural process. It's natural to doubt what you're thinking and feeling in literally any religion. It's a good part of the process. But where I am right now, I want to take that a step further. Let's say it's not real at all. Let's only work with what we have here and now and decide whether or not it's still worth it for if we want to do witchcraft or not. So throughout this video, I'll kind of be conflating my definitions of God and magic and the afterlife and the universe, because those are all conflated in my head. If one of them is real in my mind and my understanding of reality, it probably means others of them are real too. So if you hear me say God, know that I'm also talking about magic, know that I'm also talking about the universe, all of those kinds of things. Let's talk about magic and how you would define magic. I define magic as a way to put our intentions into the world. It's the carrier of our intention, and we put our actions behind it, and when we see those patterns play out in our lives, that's when we say, hey, that's magic, and it worked. So magic is the carrier of our intentions. It's what we see manifest whenever we put our minds to something in the world. Even if this magic that we see is based entirely on our own perceptions of reality, it can still be valid. What a lot of people explain the magic effect to be, as you start to research more and more about witchcraft, is the placebo effect. And I actually have nothing wrong and nothing against explaining magic away with the placebo effect. I actually think that that's a really cool and really good explanation for it, because I think it's a testament to the power of our own brains to convince ourselves of something so fully that to some extent it actually works. If I enchant a necklace, per se, for more confidence, and then I start to feel more confident, because I believed that it would work. That's a placebo, but it worked. So to me, it doesn't really matter whether or not you can explain it away with something else. The fact that you put your intention out there and then it came to you is something valid, right? It doesn't mean that it's something spooky or supernatural or otherworldly going on with people up high in the universe pulling these strings because you requested them to, right? It's literally just because you set your mind to it and then you did it. Where that power comes from is totally irrelevant to the fact that it actually worked for you, and that should be what's important when living your life. It's also pretty common that you will see what you're looking for. This kind of goes with the placebo effect too, right? If you start looking for signs in the universe, say I start looking for pennies on the ground, obviously I'm gonna start finding more pennies than people who aren't actively looking for pennies. Is that a sign from God? When you look at it like that, probably not. But even the fact that you were able to bring more pennies to you by just starting to look out for them is literally human nature. We are able to set our intentions and carry them out in the world. And that's why it's good that magic is always coupled with real life action. You're not gonna cast a spell to get a new job and then just expect that job to fall on your lap. That's not how witchcraft works. And if it does, let me tell you, you're incredibly lucky. A lot of times, even if you have a spell that's performed for you for someone else, the witch will say, hey, make sure that you light this candle while you fill out job applications and then go try to get the job, right? You can't just do only one of those things and sit around and just expect things to start happening if you yourself are not actively doing them. That's, to me, what magic can be. That's what manifestation is. Whether you call that just putting your mind to it or getting it to work, it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't also really matter whether it comes from God or not. That's a real, physical, concrete thing that you can do living in the world every single day. I wanna now that we kind of have that base of what magic is, it's, to me, just setting your intention out in the world, right? And then taking actions, whether those are ritual actions in a spell, coupled with real actions to achieve them. Let's talk a little bit more about why someone would want to do witchcraft. If God and the afterlife and anything spiritual isn't real. I'm going through this currently. I have a lot of times in my periods of doubt where I don't quit witchcraft. I will usually continue, even when I'm doubting and even when I'm angry, to continue to somewhat ritualize my life, because it's how I've come to understand like how I need to process things in reality. And this is true for a lot of other people. So let me kind of go further into what I'm talking about here. Ritualizing itself is an incredibly natural and instinctual process. We have all sorts of evidence and studies from anthropologists and performance scholars alike of animals and humans ritualizing their behaviors. We've done this basically since the time that we've been human beings. To me, this is kind of where all religion comes from, because when you ritualize something, it's usually to cope with some fair amount of stress or change or transition in your life. You can think of this in pretty concrete examples. When someone gets married, they go through this often extraordinary, extravagant process of picking out a wedding dress and planning the wedding and inviting all these people and doing all these things because they're entering a new phase of their life, going from single to married, and they're gonna start living with that person. They may have been living with them already, but as a sign of like a social standing, they're making that transition, right? So that's why we ritualize things. It can define moments of our life. Rituals can be incredibly cathartic. They can help us understand reality a little bit better, especially when we're going through stress. Taking these actions and setting aside time to do deliberate things to commemorate something can be incredibly meaningful. It can express our feelings in a way that sometimes just our words can't. Sometimes we need to go through those processes. I have really big emotions, so it makes complete sense that I need to ritualize a little bit more than a person who doesn't have the same kind of daily turmoil that I do. When we ritualize to put meaning in our lives, we put ourselves in a relationship with the world around us, because oftentimes we're changing our status or changing our way of being. So in that, because humans are social creatures, we become in a relationship and in conversation with the community around us. I'm gonna take the example of the wedding or graduation ceremony again. When you walk across that stage, or when you say your vows, you're taking a social stance that's in conversation with a larger community. This can have something to do with God or not. While a lot of people think that getting married means you've now took your stand for God and the community to make some kind of big statement, and now it's solidified because you've gone through these processes. But that doesn't need to be the case. There's no reason that a ritual needs to have some kind of divine fuel behind it. The very fact that you set aside that time as something that's meaningful for you is enough. You're still in conversation with basically every other human being in your community. While I think it would be really nice to live in a world where we did these big grand rituals and the gods sat there and looked down and watched us and listened to what we were saying, I really don't think that's what happens, at least not at this point in my life, and that's completely okay. What I do think still happens is that whether or not there's a divine force behind it, ritual helps us define for ourselves what moments of our life we want to be significant. If something is important to you, you should ritualize it or commemorate it in some kind of way. That means that you're really appreciating your life and your time here, because And that can be made even more special if we just die and disappear, because it means that you've really spent your time looking at all of the cool, wonderful things that you got to do in your life. And that's completely unique, as far as we know, to human beings. How many other creatures out there in the world, maybe aliens, do you know that can look at themselves and say, hey, I'm a human being living on the earth right now, and I'm gonna die someday, but what I'm doing right now is actually kind of cool. To me, that's one of the most important gifts that ritual can give us. The reason that you're able to define in a ritual what can become meaningful to you or what can become significant to you is because by setting aside those actions from daily life, even if you're stirring your coffee in a special way or doing something that's incorporated in daily life, by setting it aside, you've taken it apart from the continuity of regular life. In doing that, you've kind of, in performance study terms, you've entered a liminal space where you get to decide the rules of reality. You can become yourself and not yourself, as Richard Schechner would say, all at the same time. So once you're yourself and not yourself, you can be yourself on an earth with human beings where there is no grand design, and you can be yourself in an imagined universe where there are these gods and spirits talking to you, and they can become very real to you in that moment. Whether or not they're actually real outside of the fact, to me, is irrelevant. For that brief moment, they were. And that's the power of ritual, and that's actually pretty cool. Even if God isn't real on the macro scale, when you're in that ritual space, he can become real for a moment or two. So that, to me, is the more important part of ritual than working with any other set deity or having a concrete plan or knowing for sure that there's proof of anything that we're doing. Just being able to choose and define for ourselves the parts of our life that are significant to us is the main point that I'm trying to make here. I've probably said it a billion times by now. Because I honestly don't think that life has any inherent meaning, and I don't view that as a bad thing. At this stage in my life, I just think that we're here by accident and we're all just kind of floating around in this big ambiguous cloud until we die, and I'm okay with that, because that also makes living kind of miraculous. Because we're self-aware beings, because we have evolved to develop this capacity to ritualize and recognize that we're ritualizing, we can look at our lives and go, hey, this is what I'm gonna do with this, in the face of a world that means nothing. At the end of the day, believing in God and magic and witchcraft might not be real. Those healing crystals could just be rocks, and that incense doesn't really do anything. But at the same time, something about using them sets daily life apart from daily life. It becomes special to you. It can make you feel better. And that's the most important thing. If they don't do something for you, then don't use them. You live in your own mind constantly. You can't escape it. Don't discredit it just because the spell that you're doing right now might not have a god and some big grand design that's fueling everything behind it. It still matters to you in that moment. It's a way to nurture yourself. It's a way to take care of yourself. When you ritualize, you're still taking actions. It's not like you're not. You're defining that moment of your own life. And there's a ton of research to back up how ritualizing is a really important part of human life and society in terms of structuring our understanding of reality. And so if you've spent your whole life talking to a god who isn't real, or believing in the afterlife or some grand design, or practicing magic that doesn't work, so what? You defined for your own life what you wanted it to be. And now you're dead, so it doesn't really matter. There's no one to tell you, oh, you were wrong. You get to consciously define and make meaning of your own life, and that's not insignificant. In the face of a world that might be meaningless and random, that's actually extraordinary. So I don't believe in God right now. I don't believe that witchcraft always works, but I still and probably will always continue to call myself a witch. Because if anything, it means in the face of a world that might not mean anything, I have the own power within myself to decide what I want it to mean. I can tell my own story right now in the present, whether or not there's some fade out happy ending where all the angels come forth from the sky and shower me in love, and that doesn't matter. I don't have a positive outlook on my own life right now, if I'm being completely honest, but I'm gonna keep going anyway, because through my practice, I know that if I live intentionally, I can define for myself what I want my own life to be about. I can die knowing that I tried my best to live my own life as authentically to myself as I possibly could. And that matters to me more than trying to appease someone else's idea of a big grand god in the sky whose rules that I must follow, because that's not authentic. That's not coming from me. The reason that we ritualize is to understand our own lives. When you try to do something inauthentic, all you end up doing is feeling wrong. So why not just choose for yourself what you want to believe? That's why, even though I doubt my faith and I kick and scream expletives at God and don't even believe that he's listening to those expletives, I still see religion and spirituality as having a place in my life and having a valid place in other people's lives in society, even if sometimes that place is a void. They do create our perceptions of reality. I mean, wars have been fought and are currently being fought over religion. They have been since basically the beginning of time. It's not just because people are battling over the will of some perceived god in the sky, though that's definitely part of it. On a fundamental level, it really just has to do with people's ritualized understandings of reality. That's literally why people get so upset when their own religion is called into question. Because ritualizing helps us create stability in an otherwise chaotic and unstable world. Because when that idea gets challenged, it's really scary to live in a world where your perception of living might not be correct. But I think that it's something that's absolutely vital to accept and understand before you can actually start making your own choices about the way in which you want to go forth living your life, whether you practice witchcraft or another religion or not. We're not promised an afterlife, not in any concrete way that anyone can prove. Nobody has really fully died and been to an afterlife and come back to a point where we can be certain that there is an afterlife. We're not guaranteed that, so we shouldn't spend our time waiting around for it. What we do know is that we live right here, right now, in the present. And that's what we have to make count. So I'm sorry if this video is kind of a downer, or if I'm not somehow validating for you that witchcraft is always 100% valid 100% of the time. That's not what I'm here to do at all. I just want to be honest about the place I'm in and share with you how even if you don't believe in God, there are secular witches out there and they're completely awesome and valid. You can still practice witchcraft. It's not a requirement to believe in any sort of God, and it hasn't been since the beginning of time. I just hope that by sharing this with you, maybe you start to put it in a different light, and maybe say to yourself, hey, it's okay that I doubt myself, because I'm choosing what I want to do for myself in this moment. It's not insignificant, and you don't have to prove it to anyone but yourself. Did human beings make God? Probably. I think It's a great possibility considering the ways that we've ritualized. But even if witchcraft and magic and God are completely constructed by humans, now that they're so ingrained in our understanding of reality, they continue to affect our real world. I like to think that in the process of making God, humans found the God within themselves. In performing these rituals and making these vast, intricate, and fascinating religions, people said to themselves, hey, I'm alive right now. We can look at ourselves and appreciate this. We can make choices about this. And that's pretty miraculous. So what do you think? Is doing witchcraft really worth it if there's no magic prize at the end of the tunnel? Is any religion worth it at all? These are really valid questions, and there's not a right or wrong answer. I just want to kind of start a conversation and share with you guys where I'm at. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it, and if you liked, consider subscribing. I'll give you thesis updates and everything as all that's going on. The goal is to have a video out in a week on this channel, but I don't think that that's gonna happen entirely. But I really want to kind of like, you know, open a conversation, or maybe if this helped you figure something out in your own life, if you're going through a period of doubt right now, like, let me know. Until next time, stay witchy.